The work has just started in many ways because for the opposition, their motto is weaponization today, weaponization tomorrow. And unless we start dealing with some of the structural issues that we're going to talk about today. I represented President Trump and Rachel Churwitz, who are in prison for their spiritual beliefs because they opposed a woke prosecution team that does not believe in female sexuality and the empowerment of female sexuality. They awful. And they criminalized a statute. They're looking 15 years in jail, and there's not one single victim in that case. But we need structural reform beyond President Trump. First of all, we have to eliminate immunity for prosecutors and law enforcement on day one. No prosecutor is a king or queen, and they have to be held accountable. They have to be brought before juries. The same thing for law enforcement. You violate the law, you're going to trial by a jury of our peers. Second, we have to reform these statutes. President Trump was in conspiracy, dating back to the Civil War. Dating back to the Civil War. The same thing that Doug was prosecuted for. When I went to see a thug prosecutor named Jack Smith, he said, well, we can prosecute him because there was this case in the Eastern District. We just got a conviction for a meme under the same statute, KKK statute. We have to reform the statutes. We have to reform the statutes. We have to work with Congress. Nicole and Rachel are in jail for violating something called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. They didn't traffic a single person. They had a spiritual and sensual practice that the Biden administration, the woke prosecutors did not like, and they got prosecuted under this statute. It has to end. And the first thing we need to do is reform the criminal statutes that give incredible discretion to prosecutors. Weaponization is a function of prosecutorial misconduct. Ed Martin, you visit him, the dude is amazing. I mean, you know, all heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear trench coats. And he's like he's like everywhere. But where's his staff? He needs 50 lawyers. When they came after President Trump, they had 35 prosecutors and 50 agents working on the case. They assembled 14 million documents and 500 witness interviews. And the thug prosecutor, Jack Smith, said, I want a trial in 90 days. 90 days. The judge said, no, that's really unreasonable. We'll give you 120 days to prepare for trial. And by the way, Mr. Lauro, don't talk about politics in my courtroom, but we'll set the trial for the Monday before Super Tuesday. Where were the rule of law people? Where were the crying liberals? So we have to deal with structural issues. And finally, we need better judges. We need courageous judges, and there has to be a litmus test. Thou shalt not weaponize the law. Thou shalt abide by the Constitution. And thou shalt honor due process. All of the stories we heard today, and I've been practicing law as a criminal defense lawyer for 40 years, and I no longer put this on my resume, but I was a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of New York before that. And that place is a cesspool. But every single instance that we heard is a denial of due process. We need judges that will respect the law, respect due process, and not look at themselves as politicians in robes. And that has got to change, absolutely. I have hope. I have hope because of people like Cynthia and John. But we will either hang together or we will most certainly hang separately. But we have our work cut out for us.
Well, here's the main event.
Dear American public, my name is Anjali. I'm here to tell you about my friends. I've been a close friend of Nicole Daedone and Rachel Cherwitz for over a decade. For 6 of those years, these women have been crushed by the same FBI, DOJ, and media playbook used to try and destroy the lives of others you're hearing about today. During a harrowing 6 years of FBI investigation, a rogue FBI agent used fabricated evidence, coerced witnesses into false victim stories, hacked privileged communications, colluded with media organizations like Netflix, and shut down over 70 bank accounts of theirs, mine, and our families. Prosecutors threatened our own lawyers with criminal charges for simply trying to defend us. This process has nearly bankrupted us all. We took the president's mantra, fight, 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 and we followed it. We fought, fought, fought. We fought back, exposing evidence of this corruption in the media, in court filings, but it was not enough to deter these prosecutors. They doubled down. Prosecutors put on a 5-week trial where paid witnesses testified that they regret their choices from 10 years prior. No violence, no threats, no victims in this conspiracy charge, just regret. Now my friends are convicted of forced labor conspiracy. This is the first time in this country's history anyone has been charged with this standalone conspiracy. The same lawyers who fought for President Trump are now fighting for us. Professor Alan Dershowitz said a bright line of justice has been crossed in this case, and these women should not be in prison. John Lauro said this is exactly the kind of tool prosecutors under a Newsom DOJ will use to attack conservatives. Christian and Buddhist faith leaders have joined these men in saying this prosecution is unjust, un-American, and dangerous for the First Amendment. Prosecutors didn't stop with the conviction. They are now seeking the statutory maximum sentence, 20 years. They want to sentence my friends based on further false charges that were never brought up in trial. They're aiming to smear my friends in any way possible to ensure that their own crimes don't come to light. My friends are not the only people who have been targeted. One of the hardest things to see is how this is a playbook, one that is being used over and over against innocent Americans. Prosecutors are stretching the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, called the TVPA, far beyond its scope, using the salacious allegations in our case to distract from what's an inappropriate use of the statute. 5 months before the indictment, Netflix aired a true crime movie using a fabricated diary read aloud by a government witness. The filmmakers helped create the evidence. 4 weeks before trial, prosecutors admitted that the evidence was fake. The lead case agent used stolen attorney-client privileged information, mishandled evidence, and encouraged witnesses to destroy chain of custody. 3 witnesses came forward saying they were pressured by the FBI into saying they were victims. One of the defendants who refused to turn victim was arrested at 7 a.m. at gunpoint with 10 SUVs and helicopters. My 2 friends have been sitting in prison for 7 months because we fought back and are willing to bring these tactics to light. The narrative the government is depicting is not my friends' true legacy. This is their legacy. They created a meditation that helps thousands find inner peace. They created Free Food, a sit-down restaurant in Harlem, New York, serving 700 meals weekly to the homeless. Their prison monastery program has transformed the lives of over 200,000 inmates and corrections officers. These women have not stopped their good work since being sent to prison 7 months ago. They teach meditation courses and hold daily walking groups to help the women get healthy. Nicole recently published a best-selling book from prison, which is being celebrated by officers and inmates alike. My friends don't belong in prison cells. They are innocent. They belong out in the world, changing lives for the better. Please help us get the truth out. Pass this on, share it with your friends, read Nicole's book called Jailbirds in Flight. Help my friends get out of prison.
Hi, I'm Ron Elfenbein. I'm an emergency room doctor. Just imagine one day waking up and finding yourself on the receiving end of a federal indictment. That was the nightmare that I lived for the last 3 years, and I'm still living. I feel like I'm wearing a tin hat when I talk about this, I really do, but it's just been devastating to my life and to my family's life. I'm an emergency room doctor, and during COVID I became very active, and I opened up an urgent care center before COVID, and then during COVID we became active in terms of testing, and then once the monoclonal antibodies became available, we became the de facto treatment site basically for the state of Maryland, where I live. And we were bigger than Johns Hopkins, bigger than University of Maryland. We were like the largest site in the state, doing 200 to 300 infusions a week, which basically represented the cure for COVID. And this was in direct opposition essentially to the media narrative and the administration's narrative of everybody needs a vaccination. So we were happily infusing people and saving people's lives, and it was really a wonderful thing to be a part of. So much so actually that I was awarded by our governor and our state legislature a personal citation, and the State Medical Society named me its Person of the Year for all the work that I did. Well, the Biden administration decided in its capacity to shut the program down based on spurious data and misreading of that spurious data. And I went on Fox News and I called them out and I said they're going to kill people. And turns out I was right, because 2 weeks later they said, oh yeah, we did misread the data by a factor of 50%. Instead of 70% prevalence of the Omicron variant, it was only 20%. So they got that data wrong, and they were totally wrong in shutting the program down. Well, I found myself indicted on federal healthcare fraud charges out of the blue. No one had called me, no one had emailed me, no one had asked for any records, nothing. They just decided to just swing the hammer and indict me and destroy my life and destroy my family's life as well. So I didn't do anything wrong, so we took it to trial. And every theory that the government had was completely eviscerated by fact and by my attorneys, and mostly importantly by facts. They never looked at the documentation. They never interviewed any of my partners or the people that I worked with. They got my name wrong on the indictment, and the things that they charged me with, their own expert witness testified directly against what they said. They said that we weren't spending enough time with patients. Their own expert said time doesn't matter. They said that it wasn't medically necessary for us to have a provider see the patients when they were getting tested. Their own expert at trial testified it was medically necessary, in direct opposition to what they said in the indictment. So they basically indicted me with no evidence and no proof. They got my name wrong. They never subpoenaed my work emails. They subpoenaed my personal emails, but they never even looked at my work emails. Clearly they targeted me because I spoke against them and because I went on national news and said bad things about the Biden administration. So anyway, went to trial, and every one of their theories was shot down by their own experts and by my attorneys and by the facts. The last thing that they decided on, because they had gotten everything wrong, the government gets the last say. So at closing, the government attorney says, you know, you might be asking yourself, jurors, what the right level of coding was. But the good news is you don't have to know. You just have to know that Dr. Elfenbein is wrong and he's a criminal. And then they said, use your common sense. So unfortunately, they get the last word, but my response to that would have been, there is no common sense. That's like, have you ever filed a tax return? There's no common sense in any of that. The government set the rules up, I followed the rules, and then they're saying, well, you shouldn't have followed the rules, you should have used your common sense. So unfortunately, the jury bought it and they convicted me, but the judge, having sat through the entire case, who was the chief judge of Maryland, threw the whole case out and acquitted me. And not only did he acquit me, but he also said, in the case that the government decides to appeal this case, you will have a new trial. So he did both, which is unheard of for a judge to do. Here's a couple of quotes that I found pretty intriguing. The court, having closely observed the testimony and parsed the evidence in this case, concludes that the evidence weighs so heavily against the verdict that it would be unjust to enter judgment, end quote. Quote, there can of course be no crimes if the defendant complied with those rules, end quote, the defendant being myself. So the judge clearly understood. He wrote a 93-page opinion, which again is unheard of in federal law, that the judge would take away a jury verdict and write such a lengthy opinion. And 2 weeks before the Trump administration was brought into office, the Biden administration appealed the case. And in a very head-scratching decision, the Fourth Circuit overturned my acquittal, but they still offered me a new trial. So now I'm facing the prospect of a new trial in August. So these people, they hope to bankrupt you, they hope to destroy your life, destroy your family's lives, they hope you to get you to plea. That's their goal, they want you to plea. And if you won't plea, you go to trial. They find any way to lie, cheat, and steal to convict you. It's horrible, it's awful, and it's complete weaponization of the Justice Department, and I am a victim of that. So I am facing a new trial in August, and I'm trying as hard as I can to get somebody to hear my story and make this go away, because it's unjust, it's unfair, and it should go away. Thank you.
On the anniversary of January 6th, I think it is an important thing to step back and look at what the FBI was doing prior to January 6th, what they were doing in the lead up to it. And a great example of that is the Michigan Governor Whitmer kidnapping plot case. So I could spend 10 hours talking about that case, but to make a long story short, essentially the FBI spent the year prior to January 6th creating militia groups, infiltrating pre-existing militia groups, befriending a group of people, and bringing people together from across the country to try to manufacture and instigate a plot to kidnap a governor that wouldn't have existed without the FBI actively creating it. And that resulted in 14 men being arrested in October of 2020, 1 month before the 2020 election. This event was used by the Biden and Harris campaign to smear President Trump, to say that he was radicalizing these far-right extremist militia groups and that these people were like ISIS. And so we had 4 trials for this case, 2 federal, 2 state trials. Half of these men were acquitted due to the egregious FBI misconduct in this case. But we still have 5 men in prison right now. 2 of them are at Florence Supermax in solitary confinement-like conditions, and 3 of them are in state prisons in Michigan. They're all trying to appeal their wrongful convictions. The Sixth Circuit denied the federal appeal of Adam Fox and Barry Croft, who were framed as ringleaders of this. And so they have a writ of certiorari before the Supreme Court through Barry Croft's lawyer. Adam doesn't have a lawyer at all right now. That's something that is really needed. And the 3 state guys have their appeals going with the Michigan Court of Appeals, but these are processes that could last for years. And these men need to be pardoned. And it's important to understand that, again, prior to January 6th, why was the FBI creating militia groups, a national militia group, a 3%er group led by an informant who was a child sex offender, with other informants posing as heads of other state chapters? They had targets across 15 states, and they were trying to make it a multi-state plot where governors would be kidnapped at the same time or capitals would be stormed at the same time. And they framed these men as wanting to overthrow the country. The media covered the cases horrifically. They didn't do any real research into it. They simply acted as government stenographers and really convicted these men in the court of public opinion before they ever got to trial. Their trials were all manipulated in the same way the January 6 trials were, where it was already prejudiced and then the government withheld exculpatory information, or they prevented people from testifying on behalf of these men. And a lot of other egregious things happened. So my prayer and my message to President Trump would be, you have the mandate, you have the power to pardon these men. You probably can't pardon the state guys, but the 2 federal men sitting in Florence Supermax right now, you can pardon these men, send them home to their families where they belong. These men were not violent. They're not accused of doing anything violent. They were charged under vague conspiracy statutes. Oh, they were conspiring. They wanted to do something. Really, they didn't want to do anything. The FBI led them around and created meetings and events for them and then filmed them and recorded them after supplying them with copious amounts of marijuana and alcohol. That's what happened here. These men are innocent and they should be free. They should be home with their families. And this case should be remembered and the story should be considered part of January 6th because that was the lead up to it. So on the anniversary of January 6th, it is so important that we don't forget those guys, that they aren't left behind, and that they are pardoned and sent home to be with their families.
Hello, my name is Lauren Rodriguez. I'm the wife of Keone Rodriguez, who is currently serving a 5-year sentence for a crime of which he is innocent of. The Southern District of New York, beginning under President Biden, aggressively prosecuted my husband due to a small number of individuals allegedly using the software they created, and for words and ideologies that the Biden administration didn't like. As Representative Warren Davidson said in regards to this case, it's like prosecuting Microsoft for cartels using Excel. At every turn, our case demonstrated that the attorneys in the Southern District of New York care nothing for truth or justice. From lying, manipulating evidence to fit their narrative, to violating Brady and ignoring President Trump's executive orders. We also had a judge acting as a fifth prosecutor from the bench to occur by unelected and unappointed line prosecutors within the Department of Justice, so that another American family doesn't needlessly go. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Garrett Ziegler. I'm the founder of Marco Polo, which is a nonprofit research group committed to exposing corruption. During the Biden regime, we took it upon ourselves to be the entity that went through the Biden laptop, which was dropped off in Wilmington, Delaware, and never retrieved. It was a case of property abandonment. And it's probably the most interesting, hilarious case of property abandonment in American history, at least in the 21st century. On that laptop, there was 200 gigabytes of digital material ranging from photos, videos, emails, text messages, calendar entries, everything that constituted the former president's son's digital life. And how this relates to the media ecosystem and how they not only cover ridiculous things, but also choose not to cover certain stories. And that's my main thesis for today, is that Hunter Biden and what constituted the material on the Biden laptop was one of the biggest suppression operations in this century. And not just that, but what we learned from this over the past half decade and what we can do differently going forward, and you know what has happened now since that fail son received a pardon in the waning days of his father's administration, and you know what this means for the current administration and what loose ends need to be tied up in a good way, people involved, associations that need to be explored that protected this fail son. So Marco Polo, as I mentioned at the top, it is a private investigative group. We are one of the few entities on the right doing this type of work. We were modeled after Fusion GPS, which is, of course, a notorious group of liars on the left, Glenn Simpson. They worked with Mark Elias, as you'll recall, to put together something called the Steele dossier. And why this is relevant to the media is because the Steele dossier and the lewd assertions therein were fed to multiple media outlets. Stenographers like Mike Schmidt at the New York Times and other people just lapped up all of those accusations in a very, very uncritical way. So that operation that occurred in 2016 exposed to me the need for the right to have an alternative to Fusion GPS that actually published true material. And you'll recall that in early 2021, the way that somebody could get the contents from this device was basically on a Chinese website called G News and a couple of other outlets, because Twitter had basically, the analogy I use is Hunter Biden was basically a baby oxen. And you know, if you've watched a Yellowstone documentary or been to the national park before, you know that when a baby oxen is threatened by, say, a pack of wolves, the adults literally surround the young. And that's what Hunter Biden was. Hunter Biden was essentially a baby oxen surrounded by the most corrupt media apparatus in the Western world, CNN, ABC, CBS, all saying that it couldn't be verified, that because Rudy Giuliani was involved, that it was necessarily suspicious, even though, of course, the paperwork that constituted the agreement of Hunter Biden dropping this off at the repair shop was in the record. It was in federal lawsuits that the shop owner and a former speaker today, Nick Smith, actually now represents the shop owner. All of that was out there by early 2021, and so we saw a need to break through this media ecosystem and suppression operation and put up all of the contents from the device online. So we had a searchable database, and our goal was to make this available to the public, but more so to writers, to be able to use this email database so that then writers could cite and hyperlink to the exact email. There's never been this level of specificity in digital material before in American politics, that you can actually link to the exact EML file. It's an innovation. I'm very proud of it. And you can still today, and by the way, I want these open and these operational till the end of time. I want Hunter's grandchildren to be alive and still be able to go read their grandfather's emails. It's very, very funny, and I think a very cool thing to be able to do, because the internet's written in ink. And so we have to make these mistakes on the part of the opposition really hurt. And, apart from just suppressing this material, the other thing, this is my second thesis for the day, the other thing that we ought to do is create a new prestige ecosystem for writers and activists on the right. The big conveyors of prestige are no longer available to us. The Pulitzer Prizes, those sorts of awards that signal to the public and to fellow writers that you are intelligent, hardworking, they are basically shut off from us. So the patrons in our movement, the lawyers, the writers, we have to think long and hard about how do we reward the people on our side, because those awards, as I mentioned, if you have wrongthink, if you think that men can't be women and vice versa, if you have these basic opinions that are not liked in polite society, you won't get a Pulitzer. And even to this day, even after the Steele dossier collusion was revealed, Mike Schmidt still has his Pulitzer on Russia reporting from the New York Times. And unless we create those new prestige mechanisms for our own people, we'll be, basically second-class citizens, not just in the political realm, but in the cultural realm. And this means starting new magazines, rewarding the people on our side who have artistic and writing talent with those type of awards, I think, can inspire more courage on our side. And that's really what it comes down to. And this is my third and final thesis, is separating a lot of fence sitters on the right is they do not want to risk their job or their sinecure or money. And that's what separates, in my opinion, and I say this humbly, from our group from other people on the right. We don't care if we're going to get sued. We trust that putting the truth out there in its unvarnished form will attract the public. We had 2 lawsuits aided by the media. The lawsuits that Hunter Biden and Kevin Morris brought against our group, they footnoted a bunch of articles from CNN saying how I'm a bigot and a hater and somebody who aided with the J6 insurrection because I helped Peter Navarro with an election fraud report back in December of 2020. And they use those URLs cited in the lawsuit as gospel truth, as the facts, as the background facts. And we really have to create new outlets for our own people to dispel those. And that's what we're doing with Marco Polo now. We have a couple of beats, a couple of sex trafficking cases we're watching in the SDNY and other things. And as long as Hunter Biden is continuing to do these 3-hour podcasts with people in the media who are carrying water for him today and refuse to push back on any of the stuff that he says in these these podcasts, there is the need for us. So I think that apart from creating new prestige mechanisms for writers and media folks on our side, we have to really think deeply on how we personalize our attacks. I know that this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but one of the things I think President Trump does so well, and one of the really rare things for a president to do, is to not make the attacks so broad. Like, if you're going to call out the mainstream press and the lying press on a particular article, it's not enough just to say the outlet. 2 minutes into this, I was talking about Mike Schmidt. The people who are at these institutions are real people, and they have identities. And the more pressure we put on the particular, I'm not talking about any threat, but you have to particularize your grievance. If somebody just throws their hands up and says CBS is corrupt or ABC is corrupt, that's not really an insight. It takes work to know, okay, who precisely within this propaganda outlet is propagating these lies. And now, to this day, Schmidt is married to another horrible human being named Nicole Wallace, who every single day at 4 p.m. gets on MSNBC and spews her lies. And to the degree that we can push back against specific people, I think is very, very good. Of course, this is one of the things I hate about Trump. From his 2015 encounter with Katie Tur. Remember when Katie Tur was trying to grill him on an illegal immigration topic? And he said, well, try to get it out, Katie. She didn't even know what she was talking about. She was trying to spew this stat that she couldn't even articulate. And to this day, Katie Tur is still recovering from that. And so I think that we have to particularize our grievances, because only then can we have measurable results. A measurable result is getting Nicole Wallace and Mike Schmidt off of the airwaves. There has to be a concerted effort to make sure they no longer have a public platform.
Welcome back. Mike Howell here of the Oversight Project. We have an awesome panel. This is panelists here, very prolific public commentators, leaders who have built things, who have been in the crucible, and I don't want to waste any more time to take away from them. So I'm going to turn it over to my good buddy Douglas Mackey to talk about the issues we're here to talk about, which is the role that the media plays in narrative shaping, how that deprives people of their rights, makes them targets, and so forth. But before I do, we're talking about media. We're not talking about the other thing, which is called journalism. People conflate those two things too much. We don't have really journalism in this country. We have corporate media control. And so with that, just setting the table, Doug, over to you, buddy.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mike. So my name's Douglas Mackey, and 7 days after Joe Biden was inaugurated, in 2021, I got a knock on the door. It was the FBI saying that I was under arrest. I said, what for? What could this possibly be? It turns out in 2016, I sent out a meme saying that Hillary Clinton supporters could text their vote, and they felt like this meme was the basis of a grand conspiracy to steal the election from Hillary Clinton. So that night, after I got out of arraignment, well, first of all, let's talk about the arraignment. I had no idea what was going on other than I was being charged with a federal felony. Conspiracy against rights, a 19th century statute, colloquially known as the KKK Act, the Klan Act. So so why in the world am I being charged with this crime? They slapped a copy of the criminal complaint. And as I'm reading the criminal complaint, as the lady U.S. Marshal is taking me out of leg irons, I realize that this tracks a dox effort that the Huffington Post wrote about me 2 years earlier in 2018. So the Huffington Post story became the basis for this indictment in certain ways, and sort of identifying me as somebody who was using this fictional satirical Twitter account in 2016. So I get out of the arraignment, I got the criminal complaint in my hand, I go home, I have to well, first of all, they encouraged me not to bring my wallet or my cell phone to the arraignment. So once I got out of there, my roommates had no idea what was going on, so they had left about a few minutes earlier. So I had to bum a ride with a nice Haitian gentleman cab driver who allowed me to get my wallet and go to an ATM and pay. And that very night, what is Rachel Maddow's leading segment on her show? Well, none other than my prosecution of some guy posting a joke in 2016. Fast forward, so to make a long story short, 2 years later we went to trial after trying to dismiss the case and failing. And we were interested in bringing in an expert commentator from the University of Alabama, and he was going to talk about meme culture and that sort of thing and give an expert opinion. Well, a freelancer purportedly working for the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, was threatening this gentleman that he was going to go to his university and get him in hot water. So he backed out at the last minute. So the point of all this is today, fast forward to today, to make a long story short, I won the case. I was acquitted, and now I'm working with Weaponization Watch with Cynthia Hughes, who I thank very much for putting this on. But we've noticed as we've studied cases like mine and like others of weaponized justice, mostly Biden-era cases, some of which are still ongoing today, there are a number of alarming similarities. We know that they are selective prosecutions with novel and stretched legal theories, threats of excessive and punitive sentencing, and more importantly, media coordination in both directions. Too often the media appears to operate in lockstep with these prosecutors, and I would mention that it's a symbiotic relationship. We see when the media is feeding the prosecutors information that they can use in their cases, and we're also seeing where the prosecutors are feeding the media information that they can leak to set a favorable narrative, which is obviously not what they're supposed to be doing, but this is how they set the landscape for trials and everything else to turn the media against you. So we've seen with the Biden era DOJ, with the media collusion here with the prosecutors, or conservatives, Trump supporters, or individuals connected to industries that Biden simply didn't like crypto, especially, are targeted, publicly smeared, and then aggressively prosecuted. So it makes you wonder whether these journalists are speaking truth to power, or whether they are stenographers, or in some cases, mop-up men, regime janitors, trying to clean up the mess, in some cases, that the government has created. So I'll give you an example. Just recently, Trump's Solicitor General, John Sauer, directed the EDNY, Eastern District of New York, to seek dismissal of charges in a FIFA bribery case related to the World Cup. And the DOJ had made the determination that these charges were not going to uphold on appeal to the Supreme Court, and they didn't want to defend them given the court's recent history of limiting federal fraud statutes. So what we saw immediately was that career prosecutors within the EDNY pushed back against John Sauer and leaked to the press, in this case Bloomberg. And this underscored the career line prosecutors, their willingness to buck Trump's administration and to go to the media and to go around and try to get their way and to use the media selectively as a blunt instrument against Trump and against MAGA. There's other cases. We've seen a number of cases where the FBI has worked hand in hand with Netflix. There's a case called One Taste, where they actually use a lot of manipulated video footage as evidence in the case and got in trouble for it with the courts. Of course, nobody was ever punished, and the judges didn't even slap them on the wrist. So we see this time and time again, and it's an issue that we have to confront head on as we enter these midterms coming up.
Yeah, but before we proceed really quickly, I want to fixate on the last thing you said about Netflix and the One Taste case. This to me is such an absurd example of how out of control things were under the previous administration of justice, where you have the FBI working with a clear ideological and partisan outlet that's a supranational corporation, Netflix. It's one of the biggest in the United States. And so big that people truly understand its power. It's where Susan Rice goes. It's where Barack Obama goes. It is above the government in that, it funds the government and the people in there. It is more powerful and can hurt your civil rights by shaping the opinions of jurors and people around the country by just pushing them with content for a clear partisan or ideological or whatever purpose. How can anyone in America walk in front of a jury that has just seen a Netflix production that's being advertised and highly produced that's shaped by the federal government against the people they're going after? And you look at all the things the Trump administration needs to unravel, and this one that's sitting in front of them is just an example of how out of control things have gotten and how hard it is for them, for whatever reason, to turn the system of justice around, so back to a place of neutrality. And so I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about that case and the role of Netflix more broadly, and then also the role of the government in shaping narratives, because that is so counter to our system of the neutral administration of justice, where you can have Hollywood level propaganda films against you while you're fighting for your rights. It makes zero sense. And if the Trump administration wants to win, they should look no further. I promised not to talk too much, and I made myself a liar. So Colonel, over to you.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Doug and Garrett, for letting me be on this panel. I'm not sure why I'm here, except for, I want to say a couple things from a military and veterans perspective and a political perspective, because I entered the political arena shortly after I retired from the Air Force in 2013. I ran for the U.S. Senate in a state in the South against two establishment candidates. And the media was used in every race that I was in thereafter, because they saw that my message, which was secure the border, energy independence, and stop the endless wars, was resonating with the American people. The media was used to set a narrative to attack me personally over and over again. After serving over 32 years honorably in the United States Armed Forces, had been selected for command several times, had made a high enough rank where people said I was a senior leader. So after all of that, they tried to make me look like somebody that I wasn't. And they succeeded, because the media, the political parties, and the government coordinated together. And that's the failure that we have here, really, of the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, and the failure of what we call the free press. It's now the corporate media that is a narrative generator on behalf of the government. that is a narrative generator on behalf of political parties that want to maintain their power, and it's a narrative generator on behalf of people that probably shouldn't even be in this country. As a matter of fact, they shouldn't be in this country. The latest example of that is independent journalist Nick Shirley's Somali daycare and healthcare company fraud that's thought to be upwards of $9 billion. That's $9 billion of your money and my money that's being defrauded from us on behalf of a group of individuals that our politicians have not just allowed, but insisted be brought to this country. And it doesn't matter whether they were Democrats in charge like Tim Walz, who's no longer going to run for governor, or Tom Emmert, who is from Minnesota, and a Republican that shamed people for questioning wanting to bring the Somali refugees into this country in such large numbers. And that's the problem, is this entire deck of the corporate media is being used to work against you, the American taxpayer, the American citizen, where the free press was designed by our founders to be the watchdog, to be the voice on the outside that watched the government, that watched the corporations, that watched the powerful, so the folks without power would have a power in and of them to themselves in order to counteract that type of ideology, that type of effect, and we no longer have that. And that's why after I ran for office, I decided to get into the independent media business. And you're watching some of you are watching this on my social media live stream channels, I hope. Like on X, you can find me at Rob Manus there, simply because we have to have a set of institutions, as Garrett so wisely brought up in his rant. We have to build institutions to take the power away from the institutions that have become completely infested with leftist, progressive, Marxist ideology and ideologues, and the establishment, political, powerful people that still hold that power on both sides of the aisle that want to keep their power and not let you have what you deserve, which is a free country that is free from corruption and where your tax dollars aren't wasted unwisely, and instead maybe they're used to get rid of homeless veterans. We have over 30,000 homeless veterans on any given night in this country that are sleeping out in the cold. Why aren't we using all that money for that? Or to take care of the elderly more and increase their Social Security payments, for God's sake. You've been robbing Social Security for over 6 decades. Why not make it solvent using that money? And it all comes down to the media being able to control the narrative for whatever party they're doing it, and their willingness to do that instead of being the party that's supposed to be pushing back on our behalf. And that's why the weaponization of media is so important and is so wrong to be happening in this country.
Girdle, I can't resist. Now I'm going to make myself doubly a liar of a mini rant, not a full-on rant. But on the first principles of what you just laid out, the information industry, or whatever we want to call it, media, journalism, is not like another institution. It's indispensable in that this whole system, an experiment in government, 250 years old, coming up here pretty soon, doesn't work if not for that thing. Because the whole point is the people are in charge of the government. We are the sovereign. That is what makes America unique, and that's why enshrined within the other, or the other parts of the First Amendment is the right of the free press. Because the founders knew that unless the people had unfiltered information to make independent judgments as to what their government is doing, should be doing, and so forth, that there is no potential for self-government. And that's where we're at now, like a civically uninformed population that's consumed with propaganda and whatnot. And the powers to be, when you see the relationship between the government and MSNBC, CNN, the Washington Post, New York Times, FBI working hand in glove with them throughout prosecutions and investigations and shaping narratives about it, we are so backwards and opposite of what the paper of the Constitution says and our practice of government. And so like that one is beyond the pale, and its ramifications for like political economy are one thing, but also in the administration of justice, which is the next frontier. You cannot have a free and fair and neutral justice system if you do not have like a vibrant and independent information economy. And so
I totally agree with that, and it goes into our national security too. I just want to, we talked before the panel, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Inspector General system, over 4 years now until he was forced to retire because they took his second star promotion away using the auto pin twice.
Wow.
He was forced to retire on the 31st of December, just a few days ago. But the media has not covered that story because they're so invested in the COVID pandemic policies that still have all been proven to have been wrong, and the unlawful order that has been proven to be unlawful of making the military get the vaccine for COVID. But here's the other untold part of the story. It's not just that people like General Sage, but there are thousands of others below him at lower rank that don't have any power, that don't get the visibility, that are being treated the same way, but that's not the real issue. The real issue the media is not covering, ladies and gentlemen, is that over 95% of our force took that COVID-19 vaccine, and in spite of people like Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long and Ted Macy and Mark Bashaw, whistleblowers stating that the physical health of this force is in question and the readiness of this force to be able to go and fight and win a major war if they were called upon to do that is in question, is not being reported on and not being told the truth to the American people so they have an understanding of what is happening and can make decisions to change this government and this executive branch that is almost completely out of the control of the elected president of the United States, which is not what the founders intended.
Absolutely.
And that's extremely important. We don't know if our force is ready or not because of these adverse reactions to that shot.
Terrifying, terrifying. And we all know it was a political and ideological sorting exercise to clear out the military of people who actually had conservative or even common sense views. You said AutoPen, and I'm only going to take 30 seconds here because it connects to the media. After we released our AutoPen findings in March of last year, it's 2026 now, 2025, the New York Times, 2 weeks afterwards, went viral, probably because you guys retweeted it, thank you, called it a conspiracy theory on their big headline thing. A gentleman by the name of Ken Bensinger of the New York Times, longtime regime propagandist. I call him a bum steerer. If you look it up, a bum steerer is a lie, and he likes to lie. Well, 3 months after that, the New York Times got Joe Biden interviewed. He came out of the basement because, he was taking too much smoke from the AutoPen, and he admitted to the whole thing. He said, I didn't even approve the individual pardons. I just said, yeah, do some pardons and you can fill it in. So the New York Times is, proved how many other times over to be complete fabricators and liars. We know why they do it. We know exactly why they do it. They're a propaganda arm of the far left. And frankly, foreign nationals who run that company. Garrett, fill in the blanks.
Well, I would say that in a parallel track to creating new awards for prestige on the right, we should also urge elected officials, to the degree we can, to stop caring about what those legacy outlets put out. Their power, yes, they're still official papers of record, but their power is sentiment generation. If they really hate you enough, they can tar you enough, and even Republicans don't want to be seen by or seen with you if you get called certain names by the press. And so what it comes back to my third thesis of the intro is we have to stop caring about what they think, and the only way you do that is if you have courage. Mm-hmm. If you do not have the requisite backbone, you're going to care about what the left-wing press says about you. And sometimes it's only through a baptism by fire. You get indicted or you get sued, and sort of through scar tissue, you stop caring about what the left-wing press thinks about you. But we have still many people in Congress, in the House and Senate, who believe what those outlets say. And I think the best way to produce the righteous suspicion in those people's hearts is to use primary source documents. I'm going to talk about our book once more. The reason why they've resorted to the lowest logical fallacy, there's actually a logical fallacy pyramid that I love. I have it put up in my office. The bare bottom of it is name calling. They've resorted to calling me a racist, sexist, homophobic, Jew hater. It's all BS. But the reason why they've resorted to the bottom of that pyramid is because you cannot argue with primary source data. And so, and this is why I love what the Oversight Project was doing with the pardon investigation, quasi-pardon I should say, is it's reliant upon primary source data. We cannot, I'm a Christian, so I do believe in the miraculous. I believe that Jesus was born from a virgin and was raised from the dead. But beyond that, on this side of heaven, I don't believe in the miraculous. We should demand primary source evidence. So everybody who is a truthful writer, a truthful reporter, should become much more obsessed with finding the primary source evidence. For example, in Mr. Mackey's case, when you dig into a particular miscarriage of justice, the very first questions that we should be asking, and it's what the press doesn't, is who can get me the trial transcripts? I no longer will trust what somebody's opinion about those transcripts is if they do not provide the primary source evidence. It's like the only thing that Reuters does well. They will hyperlink to a court ruling. Okay, and I appreciate that, even though they're the enemy. Because if they don't, then I have to spend 5 minutes finding the URL. But in every piece that we do from here on out, and you guys do it already, but this is for the folks watching this. Really do your audience a service, and it will inspire trust on their part, because they will start rightfully believing that, hey, they're not hiding anything from me. Yes, they're writing about the thing that occurred, but they're providing the trial transcript. They're providing the wire transfer, right? That's the way that we can distinguish ourselves between from the blob. Is we think people are intelligent enough. My final thought is, the folks that persecuted Douglas, they really have a low opinion of blacks, and I'll tell you why. They truly think, if we're taking them at their word, that blacks are dumb enough to believe a meme that says you can vote by text message. It's bigotry of low expectations. They think black people are so dumb that they will follow that meme. And that's the way I would flip it around on them. We actually believe blacks don't think memes are how to vote. And that's another way to basically blow up their whole thought process of, hey, that's another way of looking at it. So I just think that all of this, by the way, all of what I'm saying only occurs if you have courage. If you do not have the requisite courage, none of these steps are going to be taken. So you need to ask God for the courage to do these reforms.
So, a lot to bounce off here. I'm going to toss one to the group for whoever wants to grab this third rail. I want to know what it is that you think is in the psychological or DNA of elected Republicans and other leaders where they need validation from MSNBC or whatever they call it, MS Now, or New York Times, the Sudoku rag, or whomever else. It's they want it, they crave it, and frankly, calling a spade. The White House plays into this game too. You see Axios continually getting scoops. Press that has been called the enemy of the people over and over again are the ones who get the real scoops or the real engagement from the White House. The same, President Trump calls them the enemy of the people. It's an incongruency there. And then you have this new setup of conservative influencers sitting in the kids' daycare. It's like a Smalley daycare, except there's actually kids there, and they don't get the real scoops. And it's like two different worlds, and we're never going to break the control if we keep at it this way. Why do you think this problem persists? Whoever wants it.
Well, I think it's purely a function of social relationships of when these people get in the Beltway and they're socializing and fraternizing with each other, and this unfortunately becomes their little bubble that they're in, and they don't see outside of it, whereas people down in Florida or Ohio or Idaho don't care about these relationships, and they don't care about the New York Times, where unfortunately conservatives are very sensitive. Even, we see where people go to a local restaurant and they get booed, or some Soros activists start throwing rotten fruit at them, or whatever happens. But I think power is exercised socially. And, I'll speak about my own life. I mean, unfortunately, once you get involved in politics, if you stand by your convictions, you're going to lose relationships, and you're going to damage relationships solely because the other person on the other side maybe can't wrap their head around it, that you might disagree with them or have a different opinion. So this happens, and unfortunately, we're human and people are sensitive to that. So I think that's something that we need to overcome.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Mike. It's a great question, by the way. Great question. As somebody that's been a statewide political candidate a couple of times now, when I was presented with the opportunity to have CNN come into the house, or our house, and sit down with my wife and I and interview us, I was already knowledgeable, even though I'd only been out of the Air Force 2 years, that there was a certain ideological bent to CNN and other and MSNBC outlets and those kind of things, to where I raised my eyebrows and I said, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" And then I immediately flipped back on myself when I was talking to my strategy guys, and I said, "But what I've been telling you is that I think my ideas are not partisan. The ideas that I ran on and Donald Trump won on, border security, energy independence, and stopping the endless war policies, are ideas that cross party lines. And for me, when I made the decision to go ahead and do it, I was like, well, it's increasing my audience, but I'm trying to reach this audience that isn't going to be on the side of the political party that I'm in, and I want to reach them. And I still, to this day, will take, if I get offered an opportunity even on MSNBC to do an interview, I will take that interview for that reason, knowing that they're going to do a hit piece on me 99.99% of the time. Same thing with the print press. There's almost always going to be a hit piece. They always use things that were created in my political campaigns, even to this day, 10 years later, in order to do that, to damage the message that I'm trying to send. But here's the kicker. Is I know that message, if it gets out, even in their venue, that some people are going to hear it and go, this guy's narrative is really wrong about this guy, or about the message that so-and-so is speaking. And I think that drives a lot of the politicians that are actually in office, if I had to guess, make an educated guess about it.
Yeah.
Well, Doug, just real quick, you mentioned the White House still giving those exclusive. I think that's a great point. I don't think it's been brought up today. And a very recent example is, why were they talking to Vanity Fair?
Yeah.
Why couldn't they give that exclusive to an up-and-comer? And you used another way of saying it. I love Tom Wolfe, the deceased writer from Manhattan. He called it statospheres, and it was in a 1980 book about the astronauts. So what you were describing is a swamp statosphere, and we have to totally obliterate that. We need people who do not want to become a priest in that swamp statosphere. We need people who operate in different statospheres. So I think that again, it's a spiritual problem. I'm not talking liturgy or the fine details of the Nicene Creed or anything, but it is a spiritual problem where I think they're worried about their legacy. They still believe that the legacy of their life and their life's work is going to be written by the New York Times. And that's one of the reasons why we release this book, is no matter what lies Hunter spews, no matter what lies Mike Schmidt puts out as Hunter's legacy, whatever Hunter's obit says in the New York Times, there's going to be this obituary in a way. So you need to convince these weak-kneed Republicans that, hey, your legacy is not going to be honored by the people you care about in the New York Times. And I think then they will stop caring about what is printed about them. But to make that effective, we also need a new prestige ecosystem of truth-telling publications to fill in that legacy gap. Because everybody, I think, in politics wants to have a good legacy and think that what they did was righteous. And if they think the Washington Post is going to be the one writing that, they'll care that the Washington Post called me a Nazi, which is of course preposterous. Yeah. So I think it's the statosphere question.
Yeah, that's extraordinarily well said. And I'll just add to it is the quickest way not to have a legacy is for political leaders to be worrying about what their legacy will be in the midst of a cold civil war that's happening in a country that's coming apart at the seams. And a political movement, let's be honest, over the last 50 years in the far left, that has destroyed so much of our country and our institutions. The fact that anybody from the president on down can be thinking about legacy in terms of total victory, which is so far away, it should just be beyond anyone's concern at this moment. We got to hit what's in front of our face and start digging out of the mess we're in instead of worrying about what Vanity Fair or others may write or photograph us doing. I know you don't have that problem.
It was the photo shoot that really sent me over the edge.
Yeah, it's out of touch. It's certainly I'm not trying to knock. They're good people. Everyone's trying to do the best. It's a tough situation, but we got to call a spade there.
The only legacy they ought to be worried about is the legacy of the country that's free and prosperous.
Yes.
For our children and grandchildren. That's the eye on the prize and the target that needs to be on the horizon for everybody.
This is a high-stakes battle we find ourselves in, and for a lot of people who are associated with this group and Patriot Freedom Project, that's their independent, that's their freedom. Their lives are at stake, and it's not, legacy and political framing and who gets the fancy write-up, and it's not whether we have a country or we don't, and whether we're free people or not. So
250 years, yeah.
250 years in, and the next 250 is not guaranteed.
Absolutely.
Of course not.
And so, gentlemen, thank you for being a part of that fight, for being the focus of that fight. Doug, you particularly, and Garrett, you've had your turn in the barrel as well, and Colonel.
Just civil. I've only faced a civil lawfare. Douglas has been in the belly of the
Yeah,
beast.
that's
Doug's-
And I urge everybody, talk about primary sources, to go read the Second Circuit opinion on Douglas's case released last July. It was gorgeous. It was unanimous. It was a total beatdown of the EDNY.
Terrific. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.